right, so welcome back everyone to the FPL Script. This is the final episode of the season with audio failures included. This is our Game Week 38 preview. I'm FPL Fran, and you'll find me, of course, on Twitter with FPL__ Fran. Also run a YouTube channel, but was very fortunate this week in a bench boost week in Game Week 37. Just quickly reviewing off of that. Got the Gusto jam. Probably not going to spend as much time explaining the jam, but it was nice because Petrovic clearly was a huge rank threat for me, and I owned Guardiola, so it was on the fortunate side of history this time in a double game week where a defender scored a brace as opposed to Ben White in Game Week 34, and Arsenal defense continuing to be clutch for the type of manager I am as someone who didn't wildcard in 35. Saka a little bit dismaying, but we got the minutes, I suppose, and of course looking forward to Saka once again here in Game Week 38. What about you, JD?
Yeah, hi everyone. So I'm your co-host Shannon Freudist. You can also find me on Twitter with the same handle. I also had a pretty good game week, and one thing I would say that even though the Gusto Jam did apply to this week, I think overall we've broken even with Petrovic because Petrovic did get bonus points and a clean sheet in the previous double game week when Gusto got nothing. I mean, he didn't play. So I
Definitely,
guess it
it's true.
was sort of a leveler in a sense, but of course it does feel very jammy. And Guardiol, I mean, I was so close to not getting Guardiol. There are two decisions this season, and I think we can talk more in our season review, where we can talk in depth. But I almost benched Gabriel against Crystal Palace when he scored a brace, and I almost didn't buy Guardiol against Fulham when he scored a brace. So there's two decisions where they were very close on EV, and so I can easily recognize how fortunate I was on both occasions. And one click of the mouse and it could have been very different in both occasions on both occasions. So other than that, I think I had the same eight attackers as or seven attackers as probably everyone else. I think Madison was the only difference. He managed to get an assist, so bully for me. 10 11 game weeks and one return from Madison. He scored a goal in game week 28, by the way. The
Mm-hmm.
game week I wildcarded, but I benched him that week. And I benched Udogi, who got the only clean sheet he managed to get before he got injured. So, really mixed bag when it comes to wildcard 28 for me. Uh, uh, Burn was the only disappointing one. I mean, he was so close to scoring. Casemiro managed to channel his old Real Madrid self for that one brief moment, which was really unfortunate. But because we managed to win in the end, right? I could have easily been rooting for a Burn goal and United to score six. So that was something that I was hoping, but unfortunately not. But other than that, the fairly standard team. Ariola and Region as well. I think I was under the impression that Fran kept Flecken,
Mm-hmm.
so I was thinking, oh, we both lost a clean sheet.
Yeah.
And then I saw your team and you sold him for Onana. So that pain you managed to avoid that pain. So yeah, we can probably move on to next week because it's almost the end of the season and we have some things to talk about.
Yeah, for sure. I think obviously it makes sense to just go through the fixtures, talk about our thoughts on them, almost as part of like an X-Men consideration. I think
Yeah.
the interesting thing about this season in Game Week 38 is there's really nothing controversial. We don't even have significant injuries. I believe KDB and Gordon are being assessed, but all likelihood is that those two players will feature, for example. So no press conference news there. Nothing really happened Game Week 37 that makes us change our understanding of the teams and how we sort of approach certain players. If anything, I suppose you could argue that a team like Arsenal, a lot more people are probably focused on their transfers, and a lot more people are focused on transfers around Crystal Palace, just because I guess the one change is that Aston Villa were confirmed to getting Champions League football, and we clearly saw on the timeline that their players are celebrating, and maybe a little bit inebriated heading towards Game Week 38. But with exception to that, really, I don't think there's anything crazy to call out this season compared to last, and I'm really not expecting as well. When it comes to deadline day, whether there's any surprises in lineups, maybe with exception to the Liverpool team. I don't know what you think about that.
Yeah, I think X-Men's are going to be fairly straightforward because everyone has something to play for, I think. And also, we talk about this every season that on the beach phenomenon is way overplayed.
Mm-hmm.
And we can see that all the teams want to finish as high as possible because there are millions of pounds on the line. So it's not even about a pride, it's just fiscal, it makes fiscal sense to go for a higher position. I think Burnley is the only exception because company has already hinted that he's going to play,
Or
try to play
sentiment, I
players who
think
are
is
going
what
to
he
leave.
said. Yeah.
Yeah. So, and we don't care about their players in FPL anyway. So I think that's fine. Maybe we could care from the sense of Nottingham Forest wanting, maybe they have a better chance of beating them in a sense. But I don't know how to quantify that in terms of expected value. I think Morgan Gibbs what already has pretty good EV. So if you wanted to go for him, this news should only encourage you further to do that, nothing else. And uh, I think Forest are safe, right? I mean, Luton are not going to. I mean, the goal difference is not going to get
Yeah, it's 12
overturned.
right now, so
Yeah, exactly. So, I highly doubt that's going to happen. And also, one more thing that might be different is normally the difference or the delta between Game Week 38 average score and all the rest of the game weeks is quite sizable. But because we've already had a record breaking number of goals this season, or the average number of goals, maybe the gap won't be as huge as we normally see, or maybe it will carry on in a linear way and it might be even more, which would be crazy because that would just mean 5 to 6 goals in every fixture on average.
hmm
So if you don't see that happening, then you should not expect any sort of surprises on that front, I think.
that's fair. So should we discuss maybe within the teams here that a lot of us aren't already invested in? So maybe Brighton, for example, is a source of interest. Liverpool is a source of interest. Palace is a source of interest. I think these are mostly the teams where people are sort of spending their last transfer on a player that they don't already own.
I would also say Arsenal maybe because
Yeah, that's
anyone
true.
who is on
Yeah,
Wildcard
that's a fair point.
35, yeah, yeah, we
Okay.
would be without Arsenal players. So maybe we can start off with Arsenal attack. So I'm looking at Saka, Odegaard, and Havertz EV, and I mean on the review it was never close, right? I mean Saka is always clear
Yeah.
on
I
expected
will
value
say though,
because of
Havertz's
penalties.
minutes just look really good heading towards this final
They do,
match day, and so it's like
they do.
I'm sure obviously you can argue that his position could change, during the match, and it really just depends on what that Gabriel Jesus sub means, right? Whether he's subbing on for
Yeah.
Saka like he did last match, or whether he's subbing on for Havertz and Havertz drops deeper, for example, which does happen from time to time. But in general, I think his default minutes do feel like that they can be ticked up on review. So if you're someone who can't afford going for Saka, I think it does
Hmm.
make a lot of sense to go. I would prioritize, for example, going Havertz over any other midfielder right now. That isn't maybe Brennan Johnson.
So one possible news we could get, I think, because again I would urge people like I did last week to wait for the deadline,
Mm-hmm.
especially because all teams kick off at the same time. So if you get any team news, it's going to be on time. And if let's say there's like less than 1% chance of Saka being benched, you, if you could wait for that, because
Yeah.
I mean, Arteta said the injury is fine. I mean, there's no injury and everything is fine. But could there be a chance? I don't know. I mean, against United, I understand why he took him off because he was fairly confident that there was not going to be a legitimate threat. So I don't think he needed that attacker to sort of maybe score a goal if needed. So I understand that sentiment, but for game week 38, if there is a chance he doesn't start, then I would just wait for that. But assuming, would you say that 78 minutes are fair right now for assessing his expected value?
Sorry, what'd you say?
Would you say that 78 minutes for Saka are fair, given the fact that
Yeah,
there's
I
some
think that's fine. I mean,
slight
that was
doubt?
roughly the time he got subbed off in the previous match.
Y-
Keep in mind that there is, I think, a small availability nerf on review, so
Yeah. So
that could take that into account as well already.
if you want to counter that, you need to increase his minutes and counter that. So if
Exactly.
that's the case, then maybe Odegaard is the play, uh, based on what happens. Because I think the key reason for Havertz's minutes or our confidence in Havertz's minutes is Martinelli just disappearing completely as an option. So we are fairly confident now that Martinelli is not going to start a single game. So I think the pool of players that we have to choose from is fairly limited. Trossard, I think, is the wildest punt you could go for in Arsenal midfield.
Yeah.
But again, I don't think his minutes are. I mean, they are good right now. But would you be surprised if he's subbed off early? I don't think so, right?
Well, I think he will be subbed off early, like he has been like
Yeah.
in every other game. But I guess investing in the Trossard is almost like being very confident that there's going to be a good Arsenal result, and then just wanting to go
And you are
for the
lucky
most
enough
differential
that,
pick. Yeah.
yeah, and you are lucky enough that no one else gets in on the act. So definitely, if you're looking for a risky move, I mean, I would say Havertz still classifies as a risky move if you go for him over Saka. But if you want to add another Arsenal midfielder, which I'm struggling to see how you would, because there are so many other good midfielder options. I'm assuming because of bench boost, 85% of top 10K bench boosted in 37. Most people own four midfielders who have already
Playable.
pretty
Yeah.
great fixtures.
Hmm.
So it's
Agree.
going to be really difficult to get a midfielder in conjunction with Saka. But if you can, I mean, Havertz, as you said, seems like a great risky move.
Yeah, I agree with that. In terms of Brighton, obviously, I think it's just discussing João Pedro. Now they have lost Dunk, so I guess style of play wise, I spoke for example to Luke, and he's not so high on Brighton, obviously, because they've lost a key player in build up and things like that. Although whether you need build up to beat Man United is an interesting question, I suppose. um, but in reality, right, I think João Pedro has come off the ankle injury. He played more minutes than we probably would have expected, so it seems like the injury was actually quite insignificant. Once again, here you could argue Brighton probably don't have that much on the line, and so if it makes sense to rest João Pedro, I think they could. But they're also pretty slim on attackers. His X-Men's look very good, and if anything, like the gulf in the quality of the fixture, I think is very good for Brighton.
Yep.
Still, so Man United have been pretty awful this season, and away from home here, you'd probably take an opportunity to take that sort of punt. I do like João Pedro a lot. I think the one question about João Pedro is that when you look at, for example, how he's rated on something like review, and the MD model versus spread odds, and even just the massive odds model, there's quite a big gap, right? So when I look
Hmm.
at João Pedro, for example, it seems like he's not particularly rated on market odds, and Isak, for example, has a much higher goal share, and I don't think there's too much really in terms of intangible information that we know about Brighton that we're yet to know about Brighton that sort of still creates that huge gulf. Like I don't know over the course of the season whether we've seen a significant change, but he feels like an odd example where he's a striker and for some reason market odds are just not high on him at all. Like I don't know what your thoughts are on João Pedro.
I think you've pretty much covered everything that I've been thinking. That the disparity in the two models always provides food for thought, because if all the models are in agreement, it's easy to go for that player. But
Yeah.
because there's a huge gap, I would prefer to get players who probably are like there's more of an agreement between market odds and review MD. So, and we'll come to those players, or we already have discussed some of those players, such as Saka and Havertz and Odegaard. So for a forward move, I guess you're looking to transfer out someone like Isaac, right? Or you already own João
Yeah.
Pedro and you want to play him over one of your other attackers. So these are one of the two situations that you find yourself in. So I would rather bench Isaac and go for a midfielder move, because I think there are better midfield options. Like even Salah, I would say that we would come on to Liverpool midfields in a minute. But
Yeah. Although I will say
um,
most people who are going to Salah, right, you have to downgrade one of your forwards because
absolutely,
you probably can't afford
absolutely.
it. Yeah.
Yes, and one of the ways to do that could be Isaac to João Pedro.
Yeah.
And so you again have eight good attackers and you have the
Yeah,
headache of
that's a fair point.
benching.
You might still bench him, but I
Yeah.
think if you're wildcard 35, right, you
Hmm.
probably actually do have to play someone like João Pedro because you'd probably play him over Gordon or Bruno, whoever you've kind of kept
Ah,
on
that's a
the way.
great
Like
point
let's
actually.
say you transfer
Yes.
Bruno into Salah or you transfer Son to Salah, which makes it sort of worse,
Hmm.
but you're forced to play Bruno. I guess in that situation you'd still want to play João Pedro over Gordon. Um, and that could be interesting for some of those managers who have two free transfers or are willing to take the hit and maybe risk a captaincy punt on Salah.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's one more move. I think we can move on to Liverpool, right? Because
Yeah, or Palace
some
actually. Let's
of
go for
the
Palace
or
first.
Palace actually.
Yeah.
Let's go to Palace first. And uh, the moves I've seen people suggesting or they want to make are essentially Gordon slash Bruno again, who are probably going to be the two players that will be transferred out to players like Olise or Eze.
Hmm.
Unfortunately, again, Mateta won't be a part of the conversation. I don't think. Maybe his EO will be higher than I anticipate. But for now, I think Eze slash Olise are much better options. I had a look at their underlines, by the way, and this is phenomenal for a team that was not at all attacking for three-fourths of the season.
Yeah, or a couple
Both
of
of
years.
them have Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
Yeah, fair, fair. So it's like point 0.6 plus XGI for both of them, which is absolutely crazy.
Yeah.
And Eze is also on penalties, so um, you could look at it as you want either the penalty taker with lower XA but similar XGI, or you want higher XA because XA is not as predictive as XG, so you could hope for, I don't know, some rebounds, or there are many ways to get an FPL assist which is not counted in XA. So
Yeah.
on EV, I think SA is clear because of penalties, but I don't doubt Olise's X-Mins for Gameweek 38, right? Because the only way I would definitely recommend one over the other is one penalties and the other is X-Mins. Do you have any thoughts about their X-Mins?
Yeah, I think their X-Men's are both around 82, personally.
Yeah,
So when you're
fair.
seeing, for example, Crystal Palace play right now,
Yeah.
and I think the interesting topic that we'll have to think about when we talk about risk later on is the idea of Isak and how benchable he is. But going back to the point about Crystal Palace mids, when you start to see, as in Elise play, they're very often 82-minute substitutions, no matter what the game state is.
Hmm.
And fortunately, of course, in this situation, they're not playing a team like Liverpool or City, so you're not going to see an early substitution. But I still think something between 82 and 87 minutes is probably where we're going to see them come off. And there's a narrative, obviously, that Olise is going to leave the club. I suppose he might be subbed off even for just that reason alone. I'm not going to. There's no narrative that I'm buying into in terms of like increasing his EV because of that, but just to talk about minutes, for example. Um, and then just to go back on the point on expected goal involvement, I think Elise, obviously he's had a small sample size this season, right? Like he's only played
Hmm.
1,200 minutes of football, which you'd say is probably still below the threshold you'd like to see to have some comfort over someone. This is his first season where he's become like a massive overperformer when it comes to finishing. You could argue that in previous seasons, obviously, maybe he could have played in significantly worse teams, and so I suppose the chance to show quality finishing wouldn't be there. But I think he's like plus 4.9 this season, NPXG to XG.
Hmm. Yeah.
Sorry, to goals, and
Yeah.
that's very nice. But I am generally concerned that people might be overshooting how good Olise is. Right, he's on 10 goals this season, and he's been incredible. But there's no need to sort of overreact to that. I think Eze is still a very, very capable player. He's a little bit more expected goal dominant, just even on non-penalty expected goals. So even without the penalties, I think Eze is still a very, very consistently good player. And positionally, I think there was a concern that I've seen on the timeline that Eze sometimes plays like a center mid, but that's just not true. I think recently they're basically like dual tens or dual attacking mid, so I wouldn't be too concerned. Eze for me is going to be the riskier option, which sort of leads me towards wanting to get him. Um, and that's the only thing that interests me about those two midfielders. But I think it's still interesting to go for them because if you want to take beach narratives,
Yeah,
on
exactly.
board,
Yes.
Aston Villa really do have nothing
Yeah.
to play for because they have locked in
Yeah.
fourth place in the Premier League.
Yeah. And again, this is not quantifiable, but you could consider that their EV, there is some additional factor
Mm-hmm.
in their expected value which cannot be shown on something like review.
Right,
But
like
if
11
you
to 5,
think
for
that,
example, he has his predicted goal projections, right?
yeah,
And I think there's quite a big gulf in terms of what he predicts Crystal Palace goals to be for this fixture, um, with his team model versus what the markets have predicted for Crystal Palace's goals to be. And I think you can see that by just quickly looking at his projections versus what Rob Tia shared with the spread markets. Um,
yes. So if that is the case and you want to consider a flag for actually not having nothing to play for this season because you cannot move up or down. And there are several teams like that. Right? West Ham also is the same. They cannot move up or and they cannot move down as well. The only the inspiration they could find is to get their goal difference into positive or zero. And I think they
sure.
need 13 goals, if I'm not wrong, to get into
Right, versus Man City.
non-negative goal difference. So that's not going to happen.
Yeah.
And if that's not going to happen, then we can definitely consider that as a factor. The most interesting thing is, and we can also talk about this from, let's say, a mini league game theory perspective, which is what do you anticipate your closest mini league rival doing, right? Because that will dictate your move in a sense.
Mm-hmm.
But there's also a chance of double bluff that they
Yes.
also will do something of that nature, assuming or anticipating that we would do the same. So it's not as easy. I think you need it's case to case. You need to know how your mini league rival operates, For example, I'm in a mini league where my rival is, I think, 12 points off me, but I don't think he's going to do anything to jeopardize his rank because he's never been that high in OR before.
Right.
So there's that aspect as well. So it's, I think, this completely team dependent and maybe not tangible discussion to expected value. But there's a lot of people who want to get to the top of their mini leagues as well this week. So as a captaincy, it does seem to be pretty okay choice, I think. Maybe you could go for Salah. I would still say that Salah with good minutes is better than someone like Eze. But that on the beach narrative, and I don't know if you saw Eze's post match interview, but he was specifically asked about how they're scoring more goals all of a sudden and stuff like that. And he just said, they're better coached and it's a better attack now. So I don't know how much time review takes to update
Mm.
underlyings in terms of an improved coaching style, but there's something to consider as well. So I would not scoff at Asia captaincy, but I also think
No, I
there's
wouldn't.
better captains other than Holland, of course.
Yeah, I think that the nice thing that sort of suits this narrative too is that like we have generally seen that Aston Villa's defense has gotten worse as the season has gone on,
Yes.
right? So
Yes.
even without taking account the beach aspect, like Aston Villa clearly have dropped off a little bit on defense. So that's like something that's comforting. But I mean Martinez I suppose is back, so that's an upgrade over Robin Olsen. Although own goals aside, I know you tweeted about it. Um, that's another thing. But yeah, I think let's move on quickly to Liverpool.
Yeah.
This is one where I think the narratives can very much drive your understanding of the expected minutes because I think we'll get a league for Liverpool. I mean, there's no other club in the Premier League that does leagues as well as Liverpool do, because apparently everyone just has an understanding of the team's lineup. And it's not like the case of Real Madrid where we share our lineups a couple hours ahead of schedule. But
Yeah. That's
yeah, so I think Gakpo obviously is the dominant centre forward and the punt that people are most keen on.
yeah.
Because of course you have these small narratives here with Isak as well. And I think it's worth talking about Isak later on. But yeah, Gakpo could start, but there's also a situation where of course you've had Gakpo start a few games. Maybe Darwin gets a chance here to start a game, and he clearly has better underlying data. And even when you look at MD, for example, Darwin's 75 minutes are not the same as Gakpo's 75 minutes. You might argue that Gakpo's a better finisher, but the reality is, of course, Darwin maybe gets two times the amount of chances that I suppose Gakpo does, within
absolutely.
a football game.
Yeah.
So it's interesting that I think he would be actually an incredible differential punt if we got the league ahead of time. Would you go there though? I suppose is the question when it comes to Darwin.
So you talked about starts, right? I think there's a larger question of the minutes as well.
Mm,
Because normally, if it's not game week 38, we would assume at least 60 to 70 minutes if they start.
yep,
But for game week 38, I really don't think that's the case for a team like Liverpool. It's a tribute to Klopp, this game. There's nothing else on the line. It's just a tribute to him. He may choose players to field sentiment based on sentimentality.
100%.
So there could be a lot of halftime subs as well, which we've seen with other managers. I don't know how Klopp is going to react to his send-off game, but I remember, for example, and there's no comparison here, but when Sir Alex Ferguson retired, the 5-all game against West Bromwich Albion, I still remember there was a whole host of subs that happened, and I think Van Persie came on and then scored, and then Lukaku scored a hat trick. So really, this like the most chaotic game I was a part of, and the last time we won the Premier League. So I'm still trying to remember as much as I can of that time. So anyway, the point is that for a great manager, it could mean anything. So I am not willing to trust Gakpo's minutes even if he starts.
Yeah,
Salah
can
is
I
more interesting, I
illustrate a
would say.
point? For example,
Yeah.
so last season I think Liverpool had nothing to play for, right?
Yes.
I believe that at 57 minutes they did a Luis Diaz substitution, a Henderson substitution, a Gakpo substitution, and an Elliott substitution. Um, and yeah, so I think you could very well see subs before 60th minute. You could see subs at 65 minutes. You could see subs at
Yep.
half time potentially,
Yeah. Yeah.
because there's Klopp loves his young players at times. Could very well just integrate someone as well. And there's a lot of people in training, right? Thiago's in training, Jota's in training apparently. Matip won't get the sending off that he wants, unfortunately. But there's plenty of players that can take away the expected minutes that you'd like from key players, and that's Salah included, I would have to say as well.
Yes,
Yeah.
yeah. But I also think with Salah, there's also an overriding club aspect that if he's going to stay for another year,
Yeah.
I don't know how that's going to affect this dynamic because the club wouldn't also want Klopp to leave Salah on a sour note when he leaves because I don't know how that's going to affect the dynamic moving forward. So for Salah, I would still say maybe 70 minutes is a good expectation of his expense,
Hmm.
but would it surprise me because that 70 minutes includes some uh, weighted average of 80 minutes and some weighted average of let's say 60 and 45 minutes as well, which is how we come to somewhere around 70. So it would not surprise me, but I would say it is unlikelier compared to all the other attackers.
Fair.
So I would not punt on anyone other than Salah for Gameweek 38 from Liverpool from an attacking perspective, and from defense, I would definitely go for Trent if I could.
Trent. Yeah. Trent
So
sounds super fit. Yeah.
it's such a good point this week. I tried desperately to find the funds. Unfortunately, I have to transfer out Guardiola, which I will not do. Just because imagine him scoring another goal, that would just be tragic, I would say. And also, it's not MD optimal anyway. So if I transfer out Burn, unfortunately don't have the cash to go to Trent. But if you do have the cash, I think it is an amazing punt. You don't even need to captain him; just
Yeah.
buy him and field him. Yeah,
I think it's crazy because obviously most of the defenders this week have a certain sort of expected value. Even when we go back to the whole debate about, your Palace midfielders versus benching Isak and things like that,
yeah,
their EV is still
yeah.
pretty close. But there's no one who's remotely close to Trent as long as he plays like 70 minutes of football, and I think that feels guaranteed.
It
Maybe
does.
maybe it's wrong though because Bradley could come in at 57 minutes and you never know. I don't think that's outlandish. Although I don't know if
Oh,
Bradley's actually in training.
Trent wears 66, right?
Okay, come on.
Jersey number.
Yeah, yeah.
No, I was
Go on.
quick out. Priyan's talked about Salah coming off on the 11th
Oh,
minute.
right. Okay,
So I
okay.
was
Yeah,
saying that the same could happen with Trent, but that's good enough, right? If that happens, so Trent choosing a higher jersey number just eliminates another factor
yeah.
for us.
But I
Yeah,
mean, it's a
yeah,
fair point. I think Trent could come off, right? Because it is a meaningless game. Like maybe he very well could because it's not like Bradley's a joke. And Bradley, I think that has been a small highlight of club season as well, like
yes,
integrating Bradley into the team. So,
yes.
um, yeah, that sort of worries me a small bit. But I think you want to be there for an occasion where I think you can have such a powerful differential when the matchup is so good as well. Like, I think Wolves right now just, yeah. I mean, most teams have
And
walked over them in the last few matches, and that's also because they've theoretically been safe, but they've also been like they have a lot of
so
injuries
many
still.
injuries, right?
Yeah.
Exactly, exactly. So, and I think one more thing that sort of fuels my possible desire to buy Trent in FPL is also because I didn't go for him in 34,
Mm,
and it was maybe not obvious because hindsight, obviously, but I do think that was a worthwhile risk
okay.
because one game starting and one game, let's say, from the bench was good enough. Now, fortunately, he got two starts because, the game against Everton meant that it's almost as if he came on as a sub, right? Because he just got 1 point from that game.
Yeah.
So it turned out like that. But getting two starts
From
was not
Trent. Yeah.
that impossible for Trent. So I would
On a
say
free
if
hit,
I
right?
could,
Is
I
that what
would
you're talking about?
definitely go.
Yeah. Yeah.
Exactly
Yeah.
on a free hit. If you were not, then obviously not. But on a free hit, absolutely, yeah.
That's fair.
So
Okay.
maybe should we talk Man City just for a little bit to see if there's any worthwhile options, or I think everyone is tripled up on City though, right?
I think
I
that's the
don't
issue. Yeah.
see
I mean, maybe
anyone
the
who
question, of
doesn't
course,
have
is like,
City.
if you own Ederson,
Ederson,
what is the play? I think because
yeah,
most managers have one free transfer, and you probably still, as a wild card, like you would only really own Ederson if you're wild carding in 35. I
yes,
struggle to believe that you'd own Ederson as someone who naturally just owned Ederson without a wild card 35. So you probably have the question of whether you go Ortega, but in reality, you probably also don't own a strong midfielder for this week, and you might want to get that midfielder, like an Arsenal player, like a Palace player. And so I just think that a lot of people are going to swerve Ederson. The only alternative, I suppose, is if you have two free transfers, which I think also there is a certain camp of managers um, that have two free transfers, and they could very well go Ortega, who is worth 3.6 million, and then have a strong differential sort of punt somewhere else. And I think that's the only interesting sort of highlight of Man City right now, given what we know.
yeah, I think that is fair. Before we move on, I think we were going to talk about Newcastle in
Yeah.
terms of Isaac. And specifically, now that Wilson is back to being fit, it's I'm struggling to keep up with what's happening because every day there's a new narrative of, is Wilson peeved? Is he going to leave the club because he chose not to appear at a digital, what was it, a digital something? I forgot what
Okay,
it was, but
like a
basically it was an online
conference.
thing
Yeah.
that he didn't appear for because he was ill, and now he's apparently back in training and he could be in contention for the game.
Hmm.
So one thing that Priyansh mentioned, who would be on penalties, I firmly believe Wilson is going to be on penalties now, because the golden boot thing is out of the question. Isaac is not going to catch up with Holland now, and Isaac also missed a penalty. So there is multifold reasons for why I think Wilson will take the next one. I don't know if you have some other thoughts on that.
Yeah, I think I actually agree with that, to be honest. And
Yeah,
so I suppose really that does very much so nerf like Isaac's EV. So
yeah.
you'd have to, I think you'd have to be pretty confident that Wilson doesn't come on for whatever reason, which I think is unlikely as well. So um yeah, I think that's a small little positive narrative for why you might want to bench Isak or um and I think that
But
ties in.
also,
Yeah,
you pointed this out in our previous stream, which was a very good point, that his EV was already nerfed because he never had the full penalty share.
that's true.
So
Yeah.
I don't think it's going to be nerfed a lot, but I also think it's not going to be boosted, which is what you were hoping for if Wilson was not going to start or was not in contention to start. So if that's the case, then definitely benching Isaac seems a great decision from an MD perspective, and also from taking a risk which there is a potential to backfire, right? Because I don't think Isaac's ownership is going to go down too massively. It would still be around 30 to 40%, I would think. But that's a good segue, I think, to the next discussion point, which I think I'll let Fran explain what this is.
Yeah, so I think, on the other day on Twitter, because I'm quite curious about what my rank threats are really around my rank tier, given that I have one free transfer, I wanted to sort of look at the effective ownership threats around me in the top 1K. Now, I think the top 1K is hopefully also illustrative for the top 10K and the top 100K respectively. In reality, it just shows you the ownerships from a certain pool of engaged managers for the season. And this is top 1K effective ownership for Gaming37. Not effective ownership, sorry, but actually just flat out ownership.
Yeah, ownership.
So you can obviously anticipate that a lot of managers will be making midfield transfers. So Gordon, um, Bruno, Garnacho, um, who else here? I'd say these are the sort, like those three specifically. They're gonna have a very low effective ownership compared to this, in my opinion. But then you made the good point about Isaac and how you don't think his ownership will drop as much, and I think that makes sense, right? Because if you think about the generic wildcard 35 strategy, the people who are on the Gordon path and they own Gordon and Isak, you're still going to be dealing with the decision where I think you're using one free transfer to get Gordon out of your team, but you actually probably still will keep someone like Isak because you probably own the combination of Bruno and Gordon. Now, of course, if you're in a luxury position where you don't own Bruno, then I suppose you could find Isak a bit more benchable. But for most managers, you have this decision either playing someone like Gordon or the replacement of Gordon, um, or bench or playing Isak. And I really think that because Gordon is so much less priority and he has a doubt and a yellow flag over him anyways in FPL, most people are just going to be playing Isak or regrettably benching him, I suppose. And there's only a very small pool of managers who will sell Isak. Maybe, as you said, as we said, sorry, the type of manager who goes for the cheaper forward to enable Salah in the midfield. So I think Isak is the most interesting player of this week because I can still see him play 95 minutes of football. I don't think that that's outlandish. He has built up a considerable amount of fitness, and the
Yeah.
illness that he suffered recently aside, um, he's proven to be really strong when it comes to minutes and very robust. So
He played 95 against United, right?
yeah, he did
Yeah, so there's no concern about his fitness or illness or anything of that sort.
exactly.
And Gordon shifting to right wing has enabled him to be on the field, whatever other personnel are playing alongside him. So definitely that. One thing that maybe am I not reading this correct, but I don't see Gordon on here. Is it because it's already gone down,
Oh, I
his
think
ownership?
sorry, I might have actually accidentally deleted Gordon, but Gordon's ownership
Oh,
is that's my mistake actually.
no, I was sorry. I was just asking because
No, it's
I
a good point.
expected
Gordon's
him to
ownership
be
was, I
around
think, was
40. Oh
88%
wow,
last week.
my bad.
Yeah.
Wow, crazy. Okay, so he's even above Foden. So again,
81 81
even
percent last week. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. And if we expect players to get rid of either Gordon or Isaac, with Gordon being the front runner for getting rid to get someone like Saka, Salah, I would expect his numbers to drop massively compared to Isaac. I think he would go to something like 20-25%. And I don't foresee any manager captaining him to gain rank because I think there are much better fixtures and much better options to captain in order to gain rank. But out of these, so you already have double Arsenal defense. Just to go through these options,
Yeah, although I think, from my perspective, I own Guardiola as
yeah,
well, so I have to bench. Oh God, I think Porro's not here either. That's my mistake too. Um, might have hidden a row in my graphic. So Porro actually
uh,
has 79% around ownership, but of course a lot of people do own Guardiola, so there's going to be a dilemma, right? If you own double Arsenal defense, you own Man City defender, and you own Porro, you're going to be benching one of them. So I think from my sort of small illustrative poll on Twitter, I asked people whether they wanted to um, bench Porro or the second Arsenal defender. And it seems like I think 65% of 61% of managers would actually start the second Arsenal defender over Porro. Now, half of that could be just Porro owners wanting to reduce Porro's ownership or perceived ownership for this game week. But I think a lot of people have seen the results of Arsenal defense recently, and inevitably, I think a lot of people are going to be minded to play double Arsenal defense over Porro. So you could very well see Porro's ownership drop and Arsenal's defensive ownership rise because some people still have the capacity to make, like, let's say, a White transfer, a Tomiyasu transfer, or a Saliba transfer. So that's something to think about as well. And I have to bench one of them, which is my sort of conundrum. I'm tempted to probably bench Saliba right now, assuming that he doesn't pop up
ooh,
with a goal.
I
But
I
yeah,
almost think because Arsenal EO defense EO has been
it will
so
be over
like
100%. Yeah, 100%.
always has been for I think all game weeks other than against City. I think was the last time it was under 100%.
Yeah.
So if that's the case, I almost would in your position because you're so close to top 1K. Would it make sense to take a risk against Poro instead of taking a risk against double Arsenal defense? Because here's the problem, as you very well know, their clean sheet odds have dropped massively. It's 28% against Sheffield United away, which is,
Yep.
I think it's terrible, flat out.
It is bad.
So
Yeah.
again, yeah, so you, unless you are again expecting some sort of attacking return, which for a one game sample is always unlikely for a defender. He could be the most attacking defender on the planet like Guardiola, and I would still say that it is unlikely for a given game. So I don't know. I almost want to play double Arsenal in your place. I unfortunately have never owned double Arsenal defense, which is a skill issue. But if I did own it, double Arsenal defense this week, I would definitely want to play them because I also think Everton, like we've been talking about other teams, also have probably very little to play for
Mm-hmm.
because they're safe. So I don't know, something to consider for you.
I think the only thing I'd say is I'm sort of hedged towards the Spurs defense anyway. So I kind of want Spurs to get that 28% clean sheet, even though I think
Oh,
it's super
Vicario,
improbable because I
Vicario,
own
Vicario.
Vicario,
Ah,
which is a
yes,
unique situation, I suppose. At the same time, you could
yeah,
argue that I'm hedged towards Porro in some way, but only really 28% of that clean sheet is going to be hedged. So um,
yes,
I think what's nice is that if I own Gabriel, I'll have 100% of that Arsenal clean sheet. And then I'm probably only dealing with
30,
20%
40%.
of a
Yeah,
threat, 20, yeah, probably 40% to be honest, of
yeah,
effective ownership
yeah.
against my second Arsenal clean sheet lost. So that's something. It's like it kind of goes both ways. So um, something I need to think about. And I think maybe another point too is people will be going Arsenal midfielders. So you can argue that there's another point there, hedged towards the Arsenal clean sheet. But I already own Saka, and I'm pretty comfortable with that. I do think that it feels better to play Saliba, to be honest, in my
Hmm.
situation. So I'll just have to make a decision. But in terms of the EO of Porro, I still see a lot of managers playing Porro at the end of the day. So I feel like I'm in a luxury position because I own Guardiola, but at the end of the day, people are just still gonna play Porro anyways.
And you own
And
Saka
yeah,
as well, so you don't have to make that midfield move as well. So I think you're better placed than most managers in that you really do have a luxury move to make this week.
yeah, yeah. I
Yeah.
suppose I could burn my transfer.
No,
I'm
that
kidding.
so Jeb,
I
FPL
saw
Jeb on
that, but I think
Twitter,
he is joking.
he is joking because I also think that if you intentionally leave out expected value on the table, you
Mhm.
actually risk losing rank more than you risk gaining rank
Interesting. Yeah.
because it's flat out you could lose points by not making a transfer. So the
Hmm.
tie doesn't matter in that case, right?
Yeah, I mean, I'm in a similar camp, and I think we can sort of segue this to sort of talk about Isak, right? Because
Yes.
in theory, like one of my top expected value moves is to bench Isak to play Eze, who obviously
Hmm.
has very minimal ownership right now. And I think between Eze and Elise is the one who actually has significant transfer volume, tied towards him. So when I was looking at, for example, price changes, Elise actually has transfer volume compared to Eze. So he's going to be a player who's going to take a small amount of effective ownership next week and have that rise. And Isak, as you mentioned, will fall, but um, there is going to be risk, obviously, attached to benching Isak, and I need to think about whether the position I am in the world, just 2 points away from the top 1,000, like, is that a positive move, if at all? And the alternative I have in my mind is to actually go for Alison Becker, who has is EV positive and then also very sort of risk safe as well. Um,
But if you buy Alisson, would you then be completely hedging against the Spurs clean sheet?
I probably would actually just play Poro still. Yeah,
Oh, you would.
yeah,
Okay, that's interesting. So you're almost hedging on the fact that they would lose the clean sheet inevitably, and then you're
yeah.
hoping for an attacking return,
Effectively,
which is
which is
fair
possible because
because
obviously Sheffield United
yeah,
are Sheffield United, and
they are,
um,
they are. And also, I was looking at transfers in, and Olise has 6 times the number of transfers compared to Eze. So
yeah,
he's had 150,000 transfers in, and Eze has had 25,000. So it's not even close.
mm-hmm.
And again, this is a decision which is: do you want to buy Olise just because him hauling would mean that you are protected, or do you want to go for Eze simply because his expected value is more? And normally, I would always advocate to make the higher EV move, but this game week is obviously different to any other game week. So, because there's no future planning, I really wish there were a clear answer
Yeah.
for
I
you.
think the irony
But
for me obviously is if I go and buy Elise, I might as well have just played Isak in the first place. Um,
yeah,
when it comes to like if I see him as a half in half out move. So for me, it's either Eze or Allison or nothing. Is where I'm sat, and who knows? Maybe we do get a bomba on the deadline, um,
yeah, we could
which would make
actually.
things
That's fair.
easy for us.
That's fair. That's fair. So I think the last section, and this could include a risk conversation because captaincy again has tremendous risk, like we talked about last week,
Sure. Yep.
and turned out that Holland and Palmer had sort of similar EV, so we didn't not similar EV, but they ended up on similar points. So those that took that risk didn't really lose out, but they did lose out on a lot of massive data ranks. So uh, I mean, you win some, you don't lose some. I guess that's the gist of that. So if you look at captaincy again, Holland, Son, and Salah based on our expectation of their minutes. If you bump up Salah's minutes to 80 plus, I think he is
Over
better
Son.
than
Yeah.
Son
Yeah.
for expected value. So the conversation simply is: if you want just the best MD move or the best expected value move, it is to captain Holland. Uh, because again, what is the best case or the worst case scenario for his X-Mins, right? Is it that City are already 4-0 up by halftime, so they bring him off just to protect him for the FA Cup final? I think that's the only realistic scenario where they are so sure of the win that they start bringing in fringe players.
Mm. Yeah. I think that's what makes it so tough, right? I think you absolutely have to be going for it just purely from a risk perspective, like this captaincy. You have to be attacking from that
Yeah,
point of view.
uh, I would agree with you. And also, I was very tempted by Son for about a week,
Mm-hmm.
but there has been some adjustment. I didn't actually chart his adjustment.
I think
Something
Haaland's
what
EV has
Rocky
actually
does.
risen today. If anything that I've
Yes,
checked, like his EV has
yes,
eclipsed 9,
yes.
which is ludicrous, by the way.
It is. It is. I think it was similar against Wolves, by the way. So that's the sort of EV that you're talking about. That you want to leave on the table just to go for someone like Son or Salah or Eze or Olise. So
And
for
once again,
Son,
too, Haaland's expected minutes have been a little bit nerfed for the last few weeks, right? Because I
yes,
think it's been
they have.
consistently around 75, 78, and
Yeah,
he does frequently overshoot that. So, it's a pretty low bar, and it's he's probably going to stay on really for this game.
yeah, and as the apocryphal stories are, he gets up because he has already hauled or he has already scored.
Yep.
So the game where he was subbed off against Wolves, he was clearly irritated because he wanted to score a fifth, but the only reason he got less minutes is because he scored four. So if that sort of expectation is to be assumed for this game week, I think 80 plus again makes sense.
Yeah.
And if that is the case, then he is clear on captaincy. From a risk perspective, so there's another interesting discussion which was going on Twitter, which was instigated by Formadillo, and he was talking about going for certain rank tier or trying to make sure
Mm.
that he doesn't go outside top 10k, which again is an arbitrary rank tier, but of course we care about it. And as
Yeah.
much as we want to admit that we are
We
robots, we do care
it
about,
is a
you
digit,
know,
right? It's a whole
it is,
digit
it
difference.
is.
So
Absolutely. And in order to get to or maybe protect yourself against a rank drop, you need to calculate certain things like we talked about last week. So you need to think about how many effective points you are playing against. So from an EO perspective, what would you expect Holland to be at? I'm going to say 170 plus. I would say 190 usually, but I'm going to say 170 because
because you
I think
think
a
people
lot
are
of
going to
people are going
punt,
to be
yeah,
punting.
okay,
Yeah,
which is good
yeah,
for me, obviously. 'Cause
yeah,
no, I'm kidding, but we'll see. Yeah, it's I don't know. I just think like he's also been so consistent, and it really does feel like a lot of the captaincy alternatives are unflattering this week. So I feel like
yeah.
some people are sort of they've realized that they've reached a level of subservience to like this captaincy. So I still think it could be like 185. That's what I'd predict. I know a lot of people say they're chasing, but a lot of people are still going to be chasing outside of captaincy, in my opinion. And
I think you are
yeah,
likelier to be closer to the reality.
well,
I'm
we'll
trying
see.
to underestimate a little bit because maybe I expect too much from people who are trying to chase.
Hmm.
When you get closer to the deadline, maybe most people will swerve back to Holland, and that would mean it is still closer to 185. But just for the sake of argument, even if you take 185, it's minus 0.85 times Holland's EV, which is 9, right
Right.
now. So that is what you are betting against, and then you have to look at what EV you are gaining from your player and what is the rank tier, or what is the EO at your rank tier that you're looking at. So something like Son, what is Son's EV if you could read it out for
I think
Son and Salah?
it's so okay. Let's just use defaults because I've been.
Let's use
Let's
defaults.
just
Fair.
I think it's fair to do so. Sun's EV is around 7.6. Although
Okay.
what's funny is Salah's minutes have just been updated and it's now 8.1, based on him playing
Okay.
82 minutes. So that's a huge gulf to Haaland's 9.1 at 86 minutes. So that's a 1 EV gap between Salah and Haaland, and then a 1.5 EV gap from Son and Haaland as well. So pretty massive.
Yeah. And let's have a quick look at how many people are transferring in Salah. So Salah has had 60,000 transfers in, which is a drop in the bucket, honestly. It's not going to change. I mean, okay, 60,000 is a lot if every single person out of that 60,000 is in
Yeah.
the top 10,000. But I'm
Yeah.
assuming that there are a lot of people outside that rank tier who are also making a similar move.
Yeah.
What would you say his realistic EO would be at? Because I think that's the more interesting part of this discussion.
Honestly, probably sub 20. Probably sub
Expected,
20.
sorry, effective ownership. That's
Yeah.
wow.
Because it was 4% last week, right? Salah's.
Fair enough.
So
Yeah.
yeah, I mean, like, how many
Wow.
transfers were this week? I
20%.
think there've been like 11 million transfers this week already, or 1.1 million.
Hmm.
You're saying
1.1.
55,000 um
Yeah.
is for Salah. So I mean, look, we're talking about 5% of managers, and I'm assuming obviously that people will captain Salah, right? Because obviously that's
Hmm.
part of the reason why you're going towards Salah, anyways, in my opinion.
Yeah.
Otherwise, you just go for an Arsenal midfielder, a Palace midfielder, and you stay comfortable with the Haaland captaincy. Maybe you even upgrade another position. Maybe you even go Trent, for example. Because if you had money in the bank and you were still confident in a Haaland captaincy, you probably wouldn't actually go for Salah. You'd probably
Yes.
actually go for someone like Trent instead. That's how I
Yeah.
feel, anyways. Um,
Yeah.
so those are kind of my thoughts. I feel like 20%, like sub 20% is pretty realistic, and I think it is really scary to go against Holland captaincy, as I said. And you also don't really want to be taking hits this week too, because this is one of the few times where not many people are pressed to take a hit for the first time in Gaming 38. We don't suddenly have a 100% EO player who's benched, or something like that.
Hmm.
So really, there's no reason to even consider something like that, and it is quite like if you look at, for example, Matera's transfers as well, he's actually had quite a fair share of transfers, and I think
I was going to say he is the most
that
transferred in
seems like
striker. Yeah.
that seems like the camp of managers who might be going for that sort of Salah punt, um, and that sort of thing. So something that's interesting is Havertz actually has a crazy amount of transfers in, like 152,000. So when we were talking about the whole Saka versus Havertz punt thing, I think some people might really be turned off by maybe Saka's performance versus United. Obviously, the yellow flag exists in FPL. His amount of transfers in is actually at the same rate of Eze, so 25,000 transfers in. So maybe Saka actually isn't going to rise as much as a transfer as other people, or people are just waiting simply for deadline leaks. And you could argue that a lot of the engaged managers will be just waiting for the deadline, and a larger portion of them are going to be making a move towards the Sakas of the world and things like
Yeah.
that.
Just an interesting thought as well, or maybe an interesting
Yeah,
fact that Saka has had minus 163,000 transfers as well.
yeah.
So it's actually net, he is minus 140,000 on
Mm-hmm.
transfers. And Salah has had 28,000 transfers out. So he is also on net something like 40,000 transfers. Not even 40, 30,000, my bad. Net 30,000 transfers. So it's not even how much, like as huge as what we expect. So now I think I'm closer to closer in agreement to your figures. So 20% year does sound about right. And Saka also might end up with like 70%, maybe 70 to
I think
75%,
that's
depending
high. I
on.
think that's actually quite high for Saka. I don't think it's
Yeah,
going to be that
it
high.
is really.
Yeah, because it
Oh,
was
okay.
25% last week, right? So unless half the field is going Saka, which I think is that going to happen? I'm not sure.
Unless we know that he starts beforehand, I think maybe you're right.
Mm.
Maybe you're right. Yeah, yeah. So what would you say realistically? 40% for
Saka
Saka?
probably sub 50, I guess.
Wow.
I,
That would be a great punt if that's the case.
maybe not
Just to
sub
buy
50,
it.
but I think it's just because so many people are interested in the Havertz punt, right? Like I
Hmm.
don't think like if you let's say adjusted Havertz's minutes to the same level as Odegaard's minutes, like he does overshoot Odegaard on EV, and that would probably make it worthwhile, to just think about, because I guess in that situation, Odegaard's probably the one that gives you the most mins, um, and sort of comfort when it comes to having a risk, but also being hedged towards an Arsenal attack. And yeah, whereas when you look at market odds, obviously Saka and Havertz I think are just about tied as well. So I can see Havertz's EO just shooting up to massively, and then we've also already talked about how there's so many Olise transfers. That's already three huge midfielder transfers that a lot of people have been making this week, and
Yes.
we haven't even mentioned, and obviously there's Salah still. So I think the
Wow.
Arsenal mid ownership might not
There
be
could
that
be
high.
a realistic chance that Havertz has more EO than Saka.
Yeah,
That
I
is
think it's
a
possible.
realistic possibility. Wow. Okay. If that's the case, that would actually push me more towards buying Saka. No, if we know that
Mm-hmm.
he starts, or if we even if we don't know, I'm going to assume that he starts. So if that's the case, then yeah, I mean Saka does seem like a better option for those that can afford, obviously, because one caveat that a lot of
That's a good
managers
point too. People can't afford
are
Saka.
buying
That's a good point. Yeah.
exactly, exactly. So it's not there are a lot of managers who are not doing this out of will, but it's
Mm-hmm.
rather by force
It's also
that they have to do
the
it.
question of whether you go out of Bruno or out of Gordon as well, I suppose, if you're a wild
Ah,
carder.
yes,
So if you go
yeah,
out of
yeah.
Bruno,
I
you
would
could go
definitely
Saka.
go out
If
to
you go out of
Bruno, by the way.
Gordon, yeah.
Yeah,
You would go out of Bruno?
yeah.
Okay, interesting.
Sorry. The caveat for that is you play Isaac. I'm assuming
Yes,
that you
yes,
play
yeah,
Isaac.
yeah, yeah. I agree with
Yeah,
you.
yeah, yeah. So because Isaac has also had the most number of transfers out of all forwards. So his EO could, as we talked about, is going to go down. But how much it goes down is completely up to chance, I think.
That's the thing. I don't even like, for example, the rate of transfers out is just 75,000, which is for me
Yeah, it's
that
not.
you could argue that most of them are these Mateta transfers, right?
It is.
To
It is.
enable something like Salah, as we mentioned. So
Yes. Yes.
yeah, that's gonna be fun
Yeah. Should we look at the chat?
for
If I
sure.
don't
Yeah,
think
let's
there are
go
a lot
for it.
of questions, but yeah.
Yeah,
Trufandella says
yep.
hi,
Shout
hi.
out to
11 if I says only true goats in the waiting room right now. Yes. Yes. Fair enough. This was before we started, so apologies. We started about 15 minutes late. Priyan says true goats and me. Uh, Priyan says don't mention that my bench in 37 scored more than it did in 31. Yeah, I think everyone who knows you probably knows that because I think he had what, Eze and double Arsenal defense on his bench, I think,
Hmm.
which was a pretty reasonable score. Ryan James says awaiting Gotage. John Alchin says hi guys, amazing content this year. Thoughts on thanks by the way. Thoughts on one FT please. Can swap Gordon for any mid in the game. Salah, Arsenal mid or Palace mid.
So I think
Yeah,
I think
yeah,
you also
yeah.
want to take on that risk as well, right? Because you have
Yes,
like not many people, as we said, can go Gordon to someone like Salah, like with one free transfer. That's a crazy move to make. And Salah's ownership, as we mentioned, should be very low. It should be lower than the two Arsenal mids. And I still like his chances versus Wolves.
absolutely.
Yep.
Uh, there's a bunch of messages about how there was no sound, so we don't need to relive that. 11 if says 7 goats in chat, but only 2 thumbs up. Can we get more stream likes for the boys? Yeah, if you are here still, we appreciate you and please like and subscribe before you leave. Priyan says, like the stream tuning in my mother's basement. That's like the other goats. Yeah, fair enough. Chris Wood is not a realistic
Okay.
captaincy shout. I told you, there's not a lot of questions. It's just, I
Well,
don't know
well,
what it is. I think,
interesting question here from Priyansh. Will Arteta regain his eyesight by picking Kedia? Obviously,
yeah,
shout out
let's talk
to
about
the
this.
Havertz Game Week 1
Let's
managers.
talk
I
about
mean,
this.
I've
Which is
constantly made the
both of us.
joke about it
Yes,
online because
yes.
obviously we all wanted to see Havertz, cooking the way he's been cooking as he has in the last few game weeks. But then Nketiah somehow just training monster, I suppose. Yeah, I don't know. I
Yeah,
don't know what to say
I
about it
think
really. It was
we
an
are
embarrassing
probably
hold, Havertz was, but
no.
I think we've been rewarded for being early adopters in hindsight.
I was going to say we were so early that I think it's that Van der Ven moment where he goes in too early and then Isaac basically just cuts in and scores. So we were Van der Ven in this situation that
It's a good
I
point
think we
actually as well.
just
I mean,
went
like
too
there
early.
is that point as well, like within FPL, like where sometimes I guess we're over predicting like certain tactical shifts at times, and I think we did get baited because the reality was the hand, in terms of Havertz playing center forward was shown
Mm.
by Arteta, and so I think it was okay to be baited by that. And I think anytime you do start with wild card one or any wild card, really, I like to think that I have got one punt in my wild card. Now I happen to put Havertz and João Pedro in my draft, and I can put my hands up in the air. I'm a little bit of a more aggressive manager in that sense, but I do think the Havertz punt was very reasonable. It obviously didn't pan out well, and it looked stupid in hindsight. But as we said, we have been rewarded somehow.
I think you were rewarded because you went Sterling in game week
Yeah,
3,
I was. Yeah,
and I went in game week 4, and I was rewarded in game week 9
yeah,
because
because
by
people
that
wild
point
carded
you had
out.
already
So
sold
yeah,
him,
exactly.
and I got his haul against Burnley. So yeah,
Yes.
that's about fair. Do you want to take the rest of the chat?
Yeah, sure. As a slash Elise final game for Palace this season's David Silva. Yeah, I mean, look. Final game narratives are just they're silly. They're almost as silly as playing against your own former club type narratives, and ultimately, as they said, good players. So I'd expect them
Yeah.
to do well, and it seems like the markets expect them to do well too. So if they do well, it's probably not because it's just their last time in a Crystal Palace uniform, because they've been doing pretty well the last few times out as
Yep.
well. And Alfie Doughty over Trent. He actually has surprisingly high effective ownership, but not many people are actually going to go there. I suppose if you somehow didn't bench boost, if you didn't transfer him out, he could plausibly be a play this week. But this is one of those weeks in FPL where there are literally like 5 or 6 defenders with amazing fixtures or amazing effective value and expected value. Sorry, and Doughty is unfortunately not within that 5 and 6. So it feels weird, but I think, for example, some people who own like the Gustos of the world might play someone like Malo Gusto. He could be interesting, but even still, he's like maybe a sixth, seventh best defender for this week, and it's it doesn't feel great going there when Arsenal have a great game, when Sheffield United are playing for Spurs, and that's a small reasonable chance for Spurs to get a clean sheet if it's ever possible. VC says, have a nice game week 38. Good luck to you both. Good luck to you. Hopes the both
Thanks,
of us
PC.
finish in the top 1K.
I am
Do you
not
think you can?
Karen
Actually,
Prangle.
I'm like
Nah.
just how many points are you off right now?
I I think it's too many. I didn't
Okay.
even check
And you'd
because
have to
come on,
make
I mean,
such
let's
aggressive
be real.
moves against the field as
Yes,
well,
exactly. And
which
I
could
don't
also
want
turn
to
out
because
significantly worse. Yeah.
exactly. And we've spoken about this before. I just want to get top 5K
Right.
this season,
Exactly.
and
Yeah.
it's like sort of a proof of my process. Even
Mm-hmm.
though the process is flawed, it's a
Process is
proof
getting
that the
lucky.
process
I'm joking.
is the process is getting lucky. It's absolutely it is. By the way, this you know that I am fully on board with that. So it's just a proof for myself. It's like, okay, you paid so much attention and so many hours of listening to managers waffle, and managers as in real football club managers waffle, and also FPL managers waffle, and there's some reward at the end of the tunnel. So
Mm-hmm.
just out of interest, I'm going to check because you asked me. 27 points, which
Yeah,
is not
that's
possible.
crazy.
That's not possible.
I
Yeah,
think
that's
yeah.
not
I
possible.
think in a mini league versus a specific mini league rival opponent, you could think about that. But the problem obviously is that ultimately you're playing against the field. Everyone owns a large range of picks. 27
Yep.
points. You'd have to basically you'd have to have a chip. You'd have to have a captaincy differential, and then you probably need at least two or three differentials, very, very low owned, all to go well. So I think what are good examples of that this week for some managers that actually reasonably own good picks with good expected value. I think Brennan Johnson is a good example of
Yeah.
such a pick who could do
Yeah.
well. Eze is a
Yeah.
good example of that. Um, ultimately, I'm sure there's going to be a huge swing between Havertz, Saka, Olise. So I'm sure, between these sort of semi-high owned midfielders, there's going to be a swing there. But outside of that, like where are we going to get the differentials from? If you play Gusto somehow, maybe that could turn out really well for you.
I am, by the
Your
way. Yeah.
goalkeeper,
So
I suppose, if you don't have
yeah.
Petrovic, could turn out well. Like if you went for Ortega this
Yeah.
week, who knows? He could save a penalty, something like that. But this is one of those weeks where, as we said in the outset of the episode, like there's no controversies for this game week 38. Everyone's probably going to play teams and players that we expect to play, and the expected minutes are not that uncertain. So there's just a very small amount of chance for risk, as I said, unless you've got a free hit chip or something like that, or you've got the ability to bring in someone like Trent, which is super cool, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. And 27, as you already pointed out, is too much of a chasm. But yeah.
Yeah. Um, some discussion on Newcastle penalty taking. I think we sort of discussed that, so I think no
Yeah.
worries. I think Ryan, obviously, your contributions appreciated. Thank you for sharing that on Wilson, obviously. Priyansh mentioning that review has him benching Isak and Guardiola. I do think obviously once you adjust the minutes of, I think Guardiola, which is fair. Isak maybe, I don't know, if you believe, let's say there's a narrative that he's been, like for example, he played a game on Thursday, right? Or
Yes.
yes, Thursday
Thursday.
night. So I guess
Uh,
you could say
Wednesday. Wednesday.
Wednesday, sorry,
Wednesday night.
Wednesday night. So
Yeah. Yeah.
you could argue that there's a small period of rest there. Maybe there's a world where he gets subbed off, but I think it's unlikely. And we've seen more than anything Newcastle play two up top, and it's plausible. Plus, obviously, Isak can easily just shift towards a wing, like worst case scenario. Um, and then question about one final time: is someone ranked 10,000 in the top 10,000? Yeah, for me, he obviously is. There's no doubt about it.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Yes.
Sorry, Andy.
Mathematically, it is. So
Yeah,
yes.
mathematically it is, and
Yeah. It is.
factually it is as well.
Yes. That's all that matters. Yeah. Fair enough.
Like if you actually were ranked 10,000, like I actually think that's cooler than finishing 9,970.
Oh,
And
absolutely.
you can still put top 10K in your bio. So
Yes.
there's
Yeah.
that. John, thank you for sending across your question. He mentioned he wants to get Salah and maybe captain 14K rank. Yeah, I think that's fair, right? Because obviously when you're at
Yeah.
14K, you are a little bit
Yeah.
further away from top 10K. I'm assuming it's not 27 points, like in your instance, in terms of making the top 1K. But that is the type of differential captaincy where it could probably send you over the line. And it's not exactly like, and I think everyone knows that, for example, if they're chasing a certain rank goal, that if you're taking risks this week, you are prepared for it to go wrong. And as long as you accept that, I think that's fine, because you also have to accept the reality that if, let's say, you went by the book, you went for all the high effective ownership picks, and the game week went well, but you didn't actually climb up enough in rank, that's most likely what's going to happen if you don't take those risks. So yeah, I think fair play to you. Good luck with that. Hope you get in the top 10K. I have nothing against it
Priyansh,
because ultimately
by the
Salah's
way.
probably not going to kill us.
Yeah,
Yeah,
sorry.
sorry. Oh,
Priyansh
Sanchez playing over
also
Petrovic.
asked. Yeah. Yeah.
Do you want
Yeah.
to answer?
Yeah.
Do you want to answer that one?
Ooh, I've been so I don't know what's happening to his fitness, but I was speculating that something like that would happen if there was nothing on the line. I think
Interesting.
there's a lot on the line for
That's
Chelsea,
true.
so I don't think that's going to
Also,
happen.
he is signed contractually to Chelsea until 2030. So
Yeah, I mean,
There's
there's
absolutely
nowhere
no
to go,
reason.
right?
You know, he
Exactly.
can play another game for Chelsea at another point in his lifetime. So,
Yes. Yeah. I
yeah.
don't think that's gonna happen. Yeah. Very firmly.
John Taylor, similar situation to me, I suppose. He's 1 point inside. However, his sort of rank goal of top 10, top 5K. Is there an incentive to play risk averse, e.g., start Isak and play over buying an upgrade to Gordon and bench Isak? I I think yes, personally. I think I'm in a similar situation to you. I'm 2 points away from my rank goal of top 1K, which I think is so plausible for me to get into. But if you bench Isak, for example, and you go for the other player, I think Isak could very well hurt you. And that other player, obviously, there are some players in the game right now, like, for example, Salah, like maybe Eze, you could argue is a stretch, but probably still a better pick than Isak uh, on the MD model and also on just massive odds. Um, but it's still a risk to take. And I think if you have ultimately a strong team, and that means players like Guardiola, for example, a good goalkeeper for this week. Because if you try to think about this, I think if you look at all the other ranked threats outside of Isak and that additional midfielder, do you have a stronger team than the rest of the field? And if your answer is yes, then I think you can play risk averse. If the answer is no, and let's say you have some other players that are risky, like for example, you're set to play someone like Malo Gusto, you might want to
Or
make,
Petrovic.
yeah,
Yeah.
you might want to bridge
Yeah.
that expected value gap if you'd like to do so. And that's just
I
something to
think
think
one
about.
one more thing that you mentioned. So the flip side of what you mentioned is probably, do you want to protect yourself by bringing in the player who is probably going to have a higher EO than someone like Isaac?
Interesting.
Because
Okay.
Havertz could end up with a higher expected or effective ownership
Yeah,
than
I
Isaac.
think that's fair. Good point.
So that is another. So it completely depends on how you expect their expected effective ownerships to be.
Yeah.
So you need to estimate those numbers and then make a decision based on that. Because as Fran already said, the one side is players you own, and then the flip side is, do you want to just go for a player you know is going to be substantially owned?
Yeah.
So yeah,
Good
that's
point.
a good discussion point. Uh, FPL ABC says Burn and Gordon to Havertz and Johns Bruno. Sorry, Bruno and Gordon to Havertz and Johnson -4. No, not for a -4. I think
I think you just
probably
want to transfer
do.
one player out
Yeah,
for one of those
yeah,
players.
yeah.
And
Gordon to Johnson makes sense. I think.
I actually like that quite a bit.
Yeah,
End
yeah,
of the day, Bruno's a
yeah.
penalty taker, and he's
Exactly.
fit now. So I'd probably take the chance to play Bruno. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well,
But this is the absolute rarest circumstance where I do think that he could be subbed off earlier than
usual.
what he
Yeah,
usually
because you've got the FA Cup
of
game
the
around the
FA Cup
corner.
final.
Okay. Yeah,
Yeah.
fine.
But I think even with good like 78 or 70 to 80 minutes, I still think Bruno should clear Havertz. Or maybe it's closer than I think it is because uh, Brighton compared to Everton is probably a more difficult fixture as well.
That's fair. Yeah.
Yeah,
But I
yeah.
guess also the consideration here is like Gordon and Johnson or Bruno and Havertz, I suppose, or
Yeah, exactly,
yeah.
exactly.
Okay.
Or the other way
Or
around.
no,
Like
the
it's
other way around. Sorry. Yeah, of course. You
Bruno
Bruno
and
Johnson.
Johnson.
Yeah.
Exactly,
And Gordon
exactly.
Havertz. Okay.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah, fair. I think
Uh,
I'd still prefer owning Bruno. Yeah.
yeah.
John's last
Um,
question says, considering
yeah.
Johnson to Havertz, would Havertz, Foden, and Son Palmer be? I think that is the top EO midfield four.
Yes.
Like, if you want to stretch it to five, I think Olise is going to make that list.
That
Maybe
is actually
Saka.
scary if
That
that's
is
the
scary.
case
Yeah,
because
it is scary.
I would definitely not own one of them, and that's going to
But actually,
be
yeah, I think
really.
you could argue that there's a three-way tie between Havertz, Saka, and Olise. I don't think that's
Yes,
outrageous to say. I think a lot of
yes,
engaged managers will pull the plug on a Saka transfer if he's fit
yep,
and if he's
yeah,
like
including myself. Yeah, yeah,
exactly. So
yeah.
the way I see it, I think their effective ownership should be very similar. But clearly, moving from Johnson to Havertz is going to be a risk averse move. Um,
Hmm.
at the same time, though, I've got to be honest and say, if you own Johnson, I would really just be comfortable owning Johnson, and I would play Johnson. I really think he's a good player for this game week, and I would like to take that risk on personally if I was in your position, because for me, I think the upgrade for Isak is Eze, and the difference in expected value between someone like Eze and Isak. and specifically an Isak who plays maybe 95 minutes of football is very minimal for me in my
Yes.
situation. Whereas obviously I think
Yeah.
Johnson's gulf in expected value versus Havertz, if he plays 95 minutes of football, which he very well could, because he's already done that twice already, this is quite
In
a
a
fair
double
bit
game week.
and
Yeah.
quite substantial.
Yeah.
So I would actually probably keep
Yeah.
Johnson still. Um, although I know your plan might be to be risk averse.
Yeah. As we said, the this is one of those rare weeks where it's equally about game theory as it is about expected value.
Yeah.
Normally, we always advocate for expected value, but this is a weird week where we do not know your personal circumstances in terms of mini leagues and OR targets and whatnot.
Mhm.
So you need to consider both of these. I think that's all the questions we had in the chat. So once again, appreciate everyone joining us today.
Yep.
We know that the games are on Sunday, so streaming on a Friday made sense because there's still Saturday for people to consume the content. And uh, we really appreciate anyone who's stuck by us this season. We will definitely be back next season. I think we will be doing a couple of episodes for like season review, right? If I'm
Yeah.
not wrong.
Probably. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. So we will try to get someone as well who has probably had a great season. We know several who've had great seasons. Fran is about to have an all-timer as well, so probably makes sense to get someone who's probably finished higher than Fran, which is
Fair.
getting like the number of managers are getting lower and lower because if he ends up in the top 1K, it's actually going to be less than 1,000 managers, and hopefully he gets there. So yeah, hope you enjoyed the content as well, and take care, everyone. Bye.
Bye, guys.